I used to always talk a lot of shit about how my friends would just disappear as soon as they got a girlfriend, trying to fight against trying to fight against that. I didn't want to be one of those guys. Just switch up. No, I'm not talking to you. I'm with boo. Nah, I don't got time.
And it
Gotta go out
happened.
with girl. No, it hasn't happened yet. I haven't really had the opportunity to allow that to happen yet, but we'll see. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Without a Roadmap. My name is Yonas, joined here by my co-host, the illustrious Cameron Curry. You're listening to the Without a Roadmap podcast, the show for product folks who don't have all the answers.
But still get the job done.
That's a very, very important piece of the message. Yes, sir.
I like the new intro. Each week you should just keep changing the adjective before my name to see what you come up with.
I got a lot, actually. I keep track of that.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right, so this week I think we're gonna just get into a little bit about how the good folks at Parlor have been prioritizing our roadmap and validating any feature ideas we want to build and also release to the world to take advantage of. I feel like Yonas and I would do a lot of reading and on books or on blogs or on LinkedIn about how to prioritize your roadmap and using all these different frameworks. But I think we both realize that that doesn't always apply to your company and also the stage of which your company is at. So Yonas and I are both at Parlor, which is a early-ish startup, and some of the models that we come across don't always really apply to what we're kind of talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I actually thought of this topic when chatting with Cam about his transition into this group product manager role. So part of this transition, Cam's role has changed a little bit. He's a little bit more focused on like kind of the higher level kind of engineering management and project management work, kind of understanding how all of the different pieces of the product fit in together. And it just came to mind that the processes that we hear about, listening to all these podcasts. When we were doing content marketing, I definitely wrote blogs about like RICE, feedback prioritization, and the Kano model. But these are just things that in my experience at two companies have never actually been used. And so it brought the kind of question of like, how are startup companies approaching the prioritization of their features and roadmap? Because in a lot of cases, we're not working with nearly as much data as necessary to really appropriately implement these frameworks. So, I wanted to hear a little bit more about like Cam's approach to doing it right now, because I think there's definitely some unique ways that we're doing it at Parlor, and then also just thinking through kind of what we've been hearing about other startups.
Yeah, for sure. I think the main thing that we do, since we're still like trying to approach that product market fit golden state that everybody dreams to get of, we're getting closer there, I think, for sure. But I think part of the reason why we're so unique is that we're still earlier, we're still trying to find that product market fit, and we're basing a lot of our assumptions and the stuff we want to build in our product based on what we're hearing on sales calls, discovery calls, user interviews with various either product leaders or data or product managers like ourselves that are in the weeds every day. So I feel like, and we're also selling to customer success personas as well. So people that are either customer success leaders or in the day-to-day handling the interactions with customers and users as well. So I think we're in this kind of unique state where we have two different personas that are both feeling the same pain, but the pain is felt differently between either a customer person or a product person. And so today we had a meeting today about talking about our next major feature idea and how it needs to satisfy both personas and how we need to have both those different people in the product getting value, but getting different value. But that same page needs to encompass everything. So it's kind of an interesting case that we have. And I think largely we've lucked out that Keith, our CEO, has been so instrumental in just leading the vision. And I think that's helped us a lot in these early days, especially for you and us, kind of taking the vision and turning the vision into a reality as product people under Jonah and Keith and the other two engineer co-founders. I think that since they've been kind of, I would say, dreaming about this, thinking about this for the last, what, 2 to 3 years, that it's kind of helped a lot steer the direction of the roadmap and the direction of the product overall.
Yeah, and just the fact that we're like largely a product team, like Parlor, the company is like, I would say more than half of it is, either engineering, design, or product. And given that part of our target demographic or, product people, we kind of have a, you know, good understanding of how we would want the product to work. And so that makes it easy for us. That's definitely not the case for most companies. And so I think that generally, like the way that I think we approach it is just generalizing like value versus complexity. I think at the highest level, that's probably what I would say it boils down to. And being a domain expert in the field that you're building product in, makes all of that so much easier. So associating how valuable a feature is to a potential customer or a specific audience, target demographic, is super important. And then being able to understand where, like how the complexity of the feature, the engineering requirements associated with it, also kind of augment the importance or the priority of that feature in your roadmap. So kind of going back to that domain expertise thing, it's like, that's critical when you don't have much data to work with, to kind of just use your gut. I know, like there's a lot of data
Right.
based people probably listening in that are cringing at the idea of making kind of like big product decisions based on gut instinct, but that is partially how it happens, definitely not
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
way.
I
um,
actually saw a thing on LinkedIn about and it was from like a VC, but pretty much she was like listing like her framework about like her investments and how she does it. And one of the things was like a gut check is of your investment is if you would actually use this yourself, like the thing you're investing in, would you actually use it yourself? And I think we can do the same thing since we're fortunate enough to be building a product for product people and customer people, and we're kind of playing both roles right now at this early stage of Parlor, but mainly focused on the product side. It's like when we're building these things, like do we ourselves find this valuable as like a gut check? I feel like that's a good way to kind of check ourselves and be like, all right, if we wouldn't use it ourselves, why are we actually building it? It's
mhm.
not always the best, but it could be a good gut check. Just because I feel like as we've known that product people and product orgs all operate differently. So every time you do that gut check, it's not always going to be right that if you don't use it, somebody else could also find it valuable.
Yeah, yeah. And part of the reason why I said the generalizing bit is only part of it is because there definitely is still a data portion, but that data portion is largely going to be qualitative data. So, even though you're a domain expert, if you're building a product, that you have domain expertise in, doesn't mean that everybody feels the same way as you do. As much as we might like to think that we have the only solution for this problem, a
Yeah.
lot of the times that's not the case. And so in our example at Parlor, a lot of that qualitative feedback comes in the sales process. And I think that's part of the reason why we've really valued having either Cam, myself, or Keith, the CEO, largely involved in throughout the entire sales cycle with these companies. And so we're able to pick up these really important pieces of information during that process that kind of guide our understanding of what users' expectations are, and how to think through the problems we're trying to solve. So I think that's I don't know, like there's product-led growth. Like product-led growth definitely includes having your product folks or kind of having a system in place where that information from the sales process is making its way into kind of these conversations around improving the product.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that's probably right now our biggest driver of our roadmap is what we're hearing doing these discovery calls, demos, user interviews. Like I feel as if, especially since the start of quarantine back in March, which is seems like forever ago, I feel like that was really like the big like aha moment for us is where after doing just dozens and dozens of user interviews like every week, just trying to just learn more about how feedback is managed and where it goes and that whole entire feedback lifecycle. I feel like that really transformed our thinking of where our product should go. And since then, we've kind of just been driving towards the vision of um, providing the solution for the entire feedback lifecycle. So we said it a couple episodes ago about how feedback lifecycle is really broken down into collecting feedback, organizing feedback, prioritizing that feedback, then validating the feedback into what you should actually work on, turning those into user priorities, and then finally closing the loop and communicating those new product updates to your users, and then finally actually educating them on how to use the new product feature. So I feel like we've just been trying to like laser focused on hitting that vision, and everything we've done since then has just been part of reaching that vision.
Mhm. So I'm curious from your perspective now that you work more closely with like engineers, how you guys handle that like understanding of complexity piece and how that plays a part in like prioritization of features. Because I always feel real dumb, like I have to reach out and be like, hey, like I want to try and make a case that we should focus on this, ask Louise, our VP of engineering, like what's the engineering timeline on this. And like I'm almost always wrong in my estimation of like the amount of effort required for features. So shed some light into that process if you have any.
That's actually pretty tough for me. I feel like it's been like kind of refreshing to see like how they think of things, and how our estimates is we always underestimate how much things could take. So like in
Underestimate.
terms, yeah, I underestimate, yeah.
Keith would
um,
like to disagree.
yeah, he would. But for example, like one of the major things we're building right now, I'll give it away, is themes. Like I've had like numerous conversations with Keith of him just being just like yo, where's this stuff out? Like we're just literally adding a top layer. Why is it taking so long? And like when you think about it and really sit down and break it down, like everything that's related to themes, there's all this logic that has to go into it. You have to load all this different data, you have to filter data. And so just hearing their side of things, and how like one of the engineers literally said like this is the way it's designed and how we want to implement it is currently impossible. So like hearing that, it's like, oh wow, all right. So we designed this one thing. How do we like kind of work back, reverse engineer it and make it a little simpler? Or do we need to have like a different kind of tech solution to figure it out, which may actually delay the release of things?
Hmm. Yeah, like that's always the case, but they always find a way to make it work at the end. And like I'm curious, like what you would want a product manager to come like asking an engineer, or like how they could kind of take the something from you, like some information to better understand like the complexity of a feature. I guess you're not an engineer; it might be a tough one, but
Yeah, I don't
like
think I can answer that.
I'm looking for the answer to like how do I estimate the engineering requirements associated with something when you have kind of not a great understanding of what's happening on the back end. And I guess maybe the answer could just be ask your engineer. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, I think it's just more just ask your engineer, and then also this comes with experience of with your product, like just learning how the different systems interact with each other, the different models interact with each other. I feel like over time you kind of just understand that what you think might be a major change could have a minor change could have major implications in the back end. Sorry, I don't know if you hear the garbage going in the background,
No,
but
no, you're good.
don't. All right, cool.
One thing that I thought would speak on this question a little bit was recently the changes to some search functionality in our products. Like I just thought it would be cool if we added a different property or made a different property searchable in this existing search field. It's like, oh, now like we're making this change, like we want to have this property searchable here, and like I just got it in the designs, like the designs handed off, talking to engineering. They're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like you can't
Right.
search that here. And like there's like and it's crazy because that could set back your entire like product or your what you're currently planning on working on by like a week, and that's just with the lack of kind of that deeper understanding. I think that you're probably working more closely with an engineer like directly on your team throughout the planning process at a bigger company where you kind of
Yep.
have like an engineer assigned to a specific team, whereas our engineers are kind of free flowing. It's kind of on a rolling basis, picking up new projects as they come.
Yeah, I would say from my experience at Optum, like the way they broke it down in our department, whereas like each product manager had their own team of engineers, and there's like a tech lead from that engineer team. that kind of took the initiative to sit down with the product person and go over like the backlog, what you're thinking of working on, and kind of spec it out. And they would, the tech lead would give like their rough estimate of how much work it would take and like how to do everything and make sure that the stories you're writing make sense and like a different engineer can just pick it up easily without having to ask too much questions. And I feel like that is probably just more so because I was at a bigger company, more resources
Yeah,
and stuff like that, that it was
exactly.
just easier for us to do it that way without us having to kind of go through the whole design process and then finally get to the finish line. All right, we're ready to hand this off and get working on it. And then like, oh wait, nope.
Yeah, you got to run that back. Yeah, so I imagine a lot of startups run into that issue where they're kind of, maybe the product person is super excited about pushing something forward, but has no understanding of, the actual work required for it, and that can throw off your estimates, that can throw off your roadmap, and so I think that's something that we as startup PMs kind of have to be, and that's where communication comes in. That's about the importance of communication as a PM. If before you assume that something is going to require a certain amount of work, you should check, and at every step of the way.
Yeah, I mean, also I think because before when we first joined, we had Louise or Jason and all those design reviews going over with us. But I think
Mm,
we've picked up the pace of our product development process so much that they legit do not have time to
right.
sit down in meetings and just chop it up about product features for 2 hours
Yeah.
at a time because they have their engineers submitting PR reviews that they have to review in order for us to get it into an environment and then for us to QA and all that stuff like that. So I just feel it's like it's a blessing and a curse that we're moving so fast, but then we also run into some stuff on the product side where we get to the finish line and then we get delayed a little bit because our specs for them aren't going to work out from a technical standpoint.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the one takeaway here is that you benefit from having some tech lead or some engineer that's like very closely intertwined with product discussions, and from the kind of like state of inception. And we should probably, once we have those resources available, look to going back in that sort of a cadence where they're in the design process as well, so we're not making these making these huge plans without a deeper understanding.
I mean, I think also just presenting before you actually even talk about designs or what the features should do, just maybe presenting the context into why you're designing this feature and why you really need to build it. Because sometimes once they actually see the finished designs, they can start to pick apart stuff that can be improved upon themselves or could be handled differently that could actually be better and more performant than what we currently want in the designs as product people.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think there's a push now in Parlor to start including business cases with all of the kind of product documentation that you create, which like we kind of just used to have it in our heads, but it's like, okay, we're growing as a team. We need to make sure that we're writing this down so people can kind of also be on the same page with us, but also to, just better understand the problem so that they can kind of think through it on their own what a, best solution from a tech standpoint is. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the first question we asked is like, how do we prioritize it here at Parlor? And I think it largely comes down to like the business case and why we're actually building what we want to build. Because as you said, we have this vision we're trying to hit upon in a fairly quick manner that hopefully we can get to before the end of the year. But also some other things pop up, like either it could be bugs, it could be a customer request that we want to look at, but we have to see how it's going to fit in amongst all the other things we're prioritizing currently. And so
Mhm.
if we have a solid business case of why we should do that, like in case we're going to lose a customer, in case we're not going to close a customer, that can be a pretty impactful thing for us at this stage. I think it all makes sense to have it out there in the open so we can see how we can fit it in, if at all, either sooner or we have to kind of deprioritize it for a little bit.
Yeah. So we spoke a little bit about the complexity piece, like that variable, and going back to the formula of, value plus complexity kind of equals priority. That's definitely not the accurate formula, but those are two functions that you want to keep in
I was
mind when
wrong with it, man.
understanding. Yeah, I
I believed
appreciate
you.
you, but there's probably more inquisitive people listening in that they're like, no, that doesn't add up. uh, well, like going back to the value piece of that, like I think something something that we started doing recently plays into that really well and helps us understand that. And that's the like customer health score that we're starting to assign to each of our active customers and free customers. And that, so I think, a little bit of background. I'm sure most people who've worked at maybe in not even just software, but there might be in services industries as well, maintaining some sort of customer health, you know, score or index, or just a basic understanding of where your customers are in terms of their engagement and adoption of your product, and also kind of what their outstanding needs are. Like, what are the things that you've heard them request or just generally in passing feel like they would benefit a lot from, and keeping track of that as a way to kind of help you prioritize the future work you're doing. So if you see that customer X is kind of upset because over the last 3 months they've had these bugs and kind of interrupting their experience, and you also know that customer X would be really excited about receiving feature Y, then that's kind of another input that you have to understand potentially prioritizing feature Y. And that's just based on the idea that keeping a customer happy that is likely to churn is going to make them less likely to churn. And those are that's kind of a your alignment of your company goals, from a business standpoint with your product vision and roadmap, and that's kind of what product strategy is.
Yeah. I think, to go off that point, I feel like when you're in these sales combos, discovery calls, or interviews, and hopefully that person or company becomes a client, is like when you're doing all of that stuff and discovering like what their user need is, like what their customer pain points are, the problems they're having, and then why they ultimately decide to buy your software. I feel like all those things that you discover during that process should be in like a centralized location, kind of like we're doing with our customer health score now. And so now not only what you need to build and prioritize, but you also know you should how to make them successful in your product, and how you can have them get value out of your product quickly. Because if you're taking too long for them to get value out of your product, they can get upset. They can just not use your product overall, even though they paid you for it. And then that's also going to lead to a high chance of churn. Because I feel like you only have like one shot pretty much to get them going and have them successful and get them going fast. And the longer you delay that time to value is going to be detrimental to them having success in the product and sticking with you long term as well.
Hmm. And I love the term time to value. And it gets me thinking about another thing that we do that provides a ton of qualitative feedback. And that's reviewing like user sessions, like watching recordings of your users in your dashboard and your platform. We use Full Story. I think that's like the kind of the gold standard for these session recording tools. And it's when you don't have thousands of users that you can kind of like make inferences from their aggregated data, like watching individuals, but watching a bunch of individuals is the next best thing to kind of understanding, uncovering potential usability issues, UX issues, watching how people try to use your product, and like what like figuring out that like the way that you thought of it isn't actually like ideal for all people, and then kind of keeping track of that with some other properties that might help you better understand how prevalent this is across the rest of your user population. There's a lot of kind of unique techniques that you can employ at your specific company, and it's all going to be based on what you find valuable, what tools you have available to you. Like, do you have an analytics tool? Do you have a session recording tool? Do you have a CRM where you can keep track of sales conversations and notes? And then just finding a system that lets you kind of take as much of this data as possible and kind of turn it into something actionable.
This is a kind of on topic question for you. Would you rather have an analytics tool, or would you rather have a session recording tool?
Well, I
So I
guess
know
Full Story.
my man loves his metrics.
Ah, well, come on. So full story is kind of unfair because it's both an analytics and a session recording tool. But let's say, we're treating full story as just a session replay tool. Honestly, it obviously depends on the stage of your company, the stage of your growth, how many users you have, the way in which your users interact with your product. Like, are they coming back every day? Or do you have a seasonal product? Like, there's going to be a lot of different variables. But I think for Parlor right now, I prefer having access to full story. I think it makes a lot more sense for us to zoom in on the specific customers that we think really like emulate closely our target demographic and the users that we want more of, and try and find ways to improve their experience, not only to keep them as customers and keep them happy, get testimonials, referrals, but because I think you can within reason extrapolate on those findings and kind of understand better what your target audience wants just from a small handful. You got to do that carefully, and I think there's definitely some risk with kind of looking too deeply into kind of session replay tools. But at the stage we're in, I don't think any huge aggregated data is going to help us make any big product decisions.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. I think that was a great response for me putting you on the spot like that.
Oh, I come ready for this. No, Cam always trying to catch me off guard.
Nah. I just know
I
you
know,
like your
but
metrics, man.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. You keep me on my toes. Um, but so there's also, in some cases, metrics aren't the choice, aren't the answer. Understanding complexity is important, but like, how do you understand like things that you don't have access to qualitative data for, or you don't really understand? That's something that I think brings out the idea of just needing to get creative. For startups, getting creative in understanding what's important to your users is probably, like, if not number one, number two behind qualitative data. I don't know if you remember, we had Andrew from Postscript on a couple weeks ago. He had a really
Sir.
interesting, yeah, he had a really interesting kind of approach. Like, I don't know if you remember that one about dealing with growth strategy in places where you just don't understand what's going on or don't understand your users very well because of a limited data.
Yeah. I think his major thing was just trying to ask just good questions. Like, even if you don't have that much data, just asking good questions, whether it's from people that you're talking to in the sales process, or if it's your current customers or people that just randomly visit your website. I think he was just always about asking the right questions, right? Asking good questions that can lead to further ideas and experiments you can run to kind of inform product decisions, whether that's for just overall value of your product or just trying to drive growth. And I think his major example was how um, they had a ton of website visitors to their website, and a lot of them weren't creating accounts and they weren't converting. And so he just simply popped a survey on the pricing page of their website, just asking something like why didn't you create an account? And he got a ton of data there that allowed him to improve upon driving that conversion number up, which I thought was super interesting, that a simple survey question can have that big an impact on something like that.
Yeah, like you just you don't have the data, you got to create it. And
Yeah, exactly.
that's definitely, yeah, it's super interesting. I think people underestimate like how much feedback people are actually willing to get, or sorry, willing to give.
Hmm.
Just because nobody's responding to your NPS surveys that you're sending over email, doesn't mean that when you ask the right questions, people aren't going to be willing to answer them, as long as you're
Yeah,
not.
and I feel like some of those survey questions are so standard, and literally everybody
Oh
asks them, that
yeah.
people just ignore them now. Like NPS survey, I probably wouldn't even answer that. If I saw one, I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna answer that. Just exit
Yeah.
out real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely some survey fatigue, and it's always nice to see companies asking something different. And I feel like it actually can provide me more value than simply just telling you whether or not I recommended your product to a friend or colleague. It's like if I
Right.
feel like this question is gonna, potentially elicit some response from the company that's favorable to me as a user or potential user, then I'm much more likely to engage with it. So
Exactly.
I loved how he talked about kind of using these kind of interstitials and using these surveys to like really understand, kind of key parts of, the user experience.
Yeah, I think another thing to get creative about, I mean, we're at Parlor, we're kind of always straddling this line of, do we go for adding more value, or do we go for like reducing friction in either our current like onboarding process or just our current workflow in Parlor? And it's like, how do you just validate that? Like, how do you decide between the two? Do you just decide based on your gut, or are there creative ways in which you can go about kind of understanding like what's the best path to choose for the next, I don't know, 2 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, yeah, and there was a lot of we weren't on the same page with it, and
We were not.
that's what makes it so difficult, because when you are in an organization that's, making really data oriented decisions, in a lot of cases you can make a pretty strong case one way or another that's pretty hard to like, push back against. It's
Yeah,
like, hey,
exactly.
look at the numbers. Hey, check the Carfax. Like
Yeah.
it's
To the
it's
scouting
right
report.
there. Yeah, but like in our world as a, early stage startup, it's definitely, there's a clear line in the hierarchy where, decision making powers exist. I think we can do as much as we want to kind of influence change in our product, and in a lot of cases we do that. We do influence kind of the direction of specific features, but a lot of times when you are at an impasse and you don't have data to kind of, make a database decision, a data driven decision, it does fall on the person above you. If your idea isn't better than theirs, or they're kind of
Or if you
the
can't prove them wrong, you can't create like the better argument for your, because I feel like, I guess it's going to come down to like whoever the product leader is at the end of the day. But sometimes the data doesn't always tell the full story. Like if you just base everything off the data of quantitative, like, hey, it's gonna drive this impact, you can get into a situation where you're just constantly using data to drive your decisions. And then at some point, a competitor can just have the same exact tool set as you, but and then start kind of pivoting and offering differentiating value, and you're just consistently going based off data, you can get in a situation where you're no longer innovating and creating new value for your customers. Like I feel like the perfect example is Skype and Zoom. Like Skype had like years of head starts, and then Zoom just comes in all along, and
uh,
now we're in
RIP.
this lockdown quarantine situation. Everybody's zooming it up, and no one's saying, "Hey, let's Skype."
Skype is sick right now. They're they soiled their opportunity, man. I remember, or yeah, I won't go into my Skype aside, but Skype was, aimed for the big kids back in the
That is
day.
true.
So
That
I'm
is
I'm
true.
upset. I'm upset that they didn't make it out of all this on top. But
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just an example. I don't know if it is an example, but it's like my way of like kind of thinking about how you can't always go off data and just making, hey, like this is going to impact these amount of users because we're getting all this requests for them. Sometimes you just have to make a gut decision based on what you're hearing or what you're seeing in like the market and what your competitors are doing. But hey, no one is doing this thing. No one's talking about it, but I feel like this is a direction that our industry is headed. So we should build that first,
hmm Yep.
which
All
is,
right.
I think, kind of what Parlor is doing on the
Yeah.
low.
On the low, man. Hey, if any of this sounds like an issue to you at your organization, I would highly recommend that you check out Parlor.io. Yeah.
All right.
No,
I
you don't have
think
to do
that
that.
is it for today. And do I have a sign off or do I not?
Let's see how quick witted you are, Cam. Think of an outro.
All right, everybody. Have a good rest of your July.
Oh my God. Zero charisma. You heard it here, folks. Cam is a man with no soul.